If you would, please turn with me to Mark chapter 5. We're going to spend the first part of our time there in the first couple of verses. One of the most concerning attitudes that I've seen among ministers and members of the church alike is that you don't have to try to do right. You don't really have to try to not sin. Sin is just this category of thing that God doesn't like, and not sinning is just a nice thing that you do for God kind of as a favor to Him and not something that you need to do for your own life. And people look at asking for forgiveness as more asking for permission to just sin again tomorrow. When I pray at night before I go to bed, I ask God to forgive me, but really what I'm asking is, can I have a clean slate to do the same thing again tomorrow? There's no intent for me to improve because I know that Jesus is going to forgive me, and that means that I'll continue to live in the same sin as before, and I'll just continue on with that forgiveness of Jesus allowing me to do that. That's a very serious problem. Sin is not just a category of thing that God doesn't like, and apathy towards sin is part of the reason that we think this way. Sin and satanic influence in our life are things that bar us from going to heaven. And not trying to remove them from our life destroys us as people. It destroys you as a person to leave sin in your life. Sin is not just something God doesn't like that you need to stop because it's not making Him happy. It's something that you need to stop because it's ruining you as a person. It's ruining all of us to continue in sin, and the out that God gives us away from that sin is ultimately a way that we can lead ourselves from the ruin that it brings to our person. Sin and satanic influence to some people are the fun parts of life that they enjoy in moderation, and that's a wrong view of sin. If sin is this destructive force in your life, having just a little bit of it is too much, and that's still a problem. Forgiveness is not a way for me to get a hall pass to keep sinning the next day and to keep ruining myself. It's a way for me to get away from that sin and to free myself from it. The passages that we're going to be looking at today are two passages from the book of Mark that talk about demon possession. And demon possession in the first century gives us a good way to think about and look at the impact that sin can have on our life. Whether or not that happens today is not really the point that I'm trying to get at. What we're talking about is how horrible satanic influence and sin is for a person, and making some parallels between what was happening in the first century and what happens today to us. So, the Bible describes a totally contrary view of sin to that of something that you just need to enjoy in moderation. Rather, in these two passages, it describes something that's horrible for a person that both of these people needed to have an influence that they needed to have removed from their life. The point is that sin destroys people, Jesus helps people, and only with the filling of the Spirit can we remove sin from our lives. So let's start first with looking at how sin destroys a person, starting in Mark 5. In verse 2 it says, "When Jesus got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. And he had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him, even with a chain." And then down in verse 5, "Constantly night and day he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains and gashing himself with stones." This man's life was not good. This guy was not living a nice existence. The problems that he were facing were driving him away from society. It's interesting to note that Jesus was in the territory of the Gerasenes here, which meant that he was in Gentile land. And while not all Gentiles were godless heathens, of course, we understand that in a place where there's not really much influence of God, like in Jewish territory, this was probably a more unrighteous area than somewhere that would have been in the territory of the Jews. But this guy couldn't live with any of them. The problems that he was having drove him away from the people that he was around. The influence of Satan in his life ruined him as a person. It says that he's in the mountains screaming day and night, gashing himself with stones. Like, this guy's not in a good spot. And sin does this same thing to us. Sin erodes the relationships that we have with people, and it drives us away from each other, from our loved ones, from the church, and it drives us away from society as a whole. If you're a habitual liar, that erodes the relationship that you have with people. If you continue to have problems like that, it pushes you away from everybody. They can't trust you. It's harder for you to work a job. It's harder for you to have relationships with your family. These kinds of problems push you away from people. If you're an alcoholic, if you're a drug addict, that destroys you financially. It destroys you physically. You can't be around people you love anymore because you might be dangerous to them. It's going to destroy your health. Sin in our lives is not something that we enjoy in moderation. It's a serious problem that drives us away from people the same way that it drove this Gerasene man away from everybody in his society. And it says, too, in 5 verse 5, that he's gashing himself with stones. It's not just that sin is going to make me kind of reclusive and I'm not going to be able to have a million friends. It's destructive to me. It hurts me for me to continue to live in sin. It's physically harmful for this man to be possessed by a demon. And in the same way, it's physically harmful to people. It's harmful to my person for me to live in sin. It's not something that we can look at as an acceptable thing for me to leave in my life, but it needs to be something totally removed or it's going to continue to have this influence. In Mark chapter 9, verse 22, the boy's father tells us that the Spirit is throwing his son into fire and into water. And it says that it's seeking to destroy him. Now, if you remember in Mark, there's a passage that talks about how the Pharisees were plotting to destroy Jesus. And the word for destroy here does not mean kill. It actually means to ruin. The spirit that's in this boy is trying to ruin him. It's trying to ruin his life. And Satan is doing the same thing to you today. He's trying to ruin your life. If you're leaving sin in your life and you're leaving room for Satan to take place in your life, you're allowing him to destroy you. You're allowing him to bring you to ruin the same way that both of these people are ruined. Nobody looks at these passages in the first century talking about demon possession and says that these people were doing okay and that they could have been left this way. We neglect these passages a lot because we look at them and say, well, that doesn't happen today, so that means that it's not really relevant to me. But they show us a picture of how horrible it can be for somebody to be left in sin. The influence and the impact that sin has in your life is terrible, and it's not something that you can live with because sin destroys a person. So this boy needed his father to take him to get help. And the Gerasene demoniac needed Jesus to help him. He brought himself to Jesus and laid down at his feet. And that's what we'll talk about next, is that Jesus helps people. Jesus helps people. In chapter 5, verse 6 of Mark, it says, seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed before him. It says here, using first person, or singular pronouns rather, that the man runs up, which leads me to believe that it is the man himself who runs up and lays himself at the feet of Jesus. And laying himself at the feet of Jesus, he's asking that he is not tormented. And Jesus is saying in verse 8, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. This man runs up and lays himself at the feet of Jesus and is begging him for help, is begging him for relief from his suffering. This is not an attitude of somebody who wants permission to continue to live this way tomorrow. When you ask Jesus for help and when you ask God for forgiveness, you're not looking at God and asking him for permission to continue living in sin. You're asking him for freedom from that sin. And this is the posture of somebody who's really looking for freedom from the affliction that they're facing. If sin really afflicts you and destroys you as a person, your attitude towards sin should not be that it's something that you want to continue to deal with. It should be something that you're going to beg Jesus for help with. He's going to give this man help, as we're going to see, and it's not like Jesus is going to make you do anything for your forgiveness per se. But you need to have a posture and an attitude about sin that's really looking to get away from it. If your attitude about sin is that you just want a clean slate so that you can keep going, you're not understanding the impact that it has on you. If this man just came up to Jesus and said, please help me deal with this for today, but I'll keep going with it tomorrow, and he wanted to stay suffering, then that would be ridiculous. We would look at this man and we would say, this guy's situation is terrible. Why does he want to stay that way? Why do we want to stay that way? Why do we want to stay in sin? Why do we want to keep dealing with these problems that we have? This man comes to Jesus and asks him for freedom from the affliction that he's facing, and we need to ask for forgiveness as if we're asking for freedom from the afflictions that we're facing. We're asking for freedom from the sin that we have, not just that we can push it off to another day. He wants to be free from this problem that he has, not just face it again tomorrow. The boy's father in chapter 9, verse 17, has to bring him to Jesus for help. This boy was unable to bring himself to Jesus because of the gravity of the issue that he had. And sometimes people are like that now. There are people out there in the world that don't know where they can get help, or they don't know how they can get to it, or they don't understand. And it's our job as preachers and as ministers, and ultimately it's our job as Christians to bring people to Jesus, to lead them to the help that they need. It's never kinder to leave somebody to face this kind of suffering. It's never kinder to leave somebody to deal with these problems. If you really believe that sin destroys a person, then it's never going to be better for you to save yourself some embarrassment or save somebody else some time and not tell them that they can be saved from the problems that they face. It's always going to be better for you to inform them of a way out from the problem that they have. And this boy's father brought him to a way out, brought him to Jesus. And we have to do that same thing for people. The Gerasene demoniac humbles himself and accepts that he has a problem and brings himself before Jesus. And the boy's father understands that he's incapable of helping his son. Now, it's interesting. In Mark chapter 9, verse 18, the boy's father describes the problem that he has. And then he also says that Jesus' disciples were unable to cast out the demon themselves. And in chapter 9, verse 29, the disciples ask him why they were unable to cast out this demon, and Jesus tells them that this kind only comes out by prayer. The problems that people face today and the problems that we face in our life are not things that we can just solve on our own. I am insufficient to deal with your sin. I am insufficient to deal with my sin. None of you are sufficient to deal with the problems that you face, and it's only by petition to God that we can actually help people. And it's only by petition to God that we can actually help ourselves. If we look at a problem and we say that we can save people, we're looking at it the wrong way. And that was the problem that these disciples were facing here when trying to cast out this demon. The only help that we can provide to anybody is we bring them to Jesus. We point them in the right direction, and we point them to the help that they need, the salvation that they can get through him, not through us. And these disciples learned that lesson by feeling the insufficiency to deal with this problem. It was probably embarrassing for these disciples to say, yes, I have the power to deal with the problem that you have. Come out, Spirit, and then nothing happens, and the boy still has problems. And that's the same thing when we try to step in and deal with people's sin issues instead of letting God handle it, which is what he's there for. It's foolish for us to think that we are sufficient to deal with these problems, and instead that what we need to do is lead people to Jesus. That's the key. So if sin destroys a person and it ruins your life, and the solution is to go to Jesus, then what comes next? I've dealt with the problem. It's been driven out from my life. What do I need to do now to keep it from coming back? Well, after you've sincerely come to Jesus and asked for a clean slate, it's time to fill that with something good. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 12, verses 43 through 45. And Jesus here is giving an illustration to talk about when an unclean spirit goes out from a man. And I'll read it to you here. Now, when the unclean spirit goes out of a man, it passes through waterless places seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came, and when it comes, it finds it unoccupied, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and takes along with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they go in and live there. And the last state of that man becomes worse than the first, because that is the way it will also be with this evil generation. If we drive out bad influences from our life, and we neglect to fill our life with God and with the Spirit, the problem's going to come back, either the same way that it was before, or a new problem is going to come up, and it's going to be worse than it was than when we started. If you fix problems in your life with self-help books, scheduling, you fill up your day, you're productive, you've really helped yourself get out of a rut, and you've solved some of the problems that you have. That's not enough. You're not going to save your soul with self-help books. You're not going to save your soul with mindfulness and intentionality and schedules and all these different things. You're never going to save yourself by any of these means. You're only going to save yourself through Jesus, and really, he's only going to save you. We're not going to help ourselves without inviting the Spirit into our lives. If we clean sin out of our life, we need to fill our life then with the Spirit, not just leave our house empty. Satan is at the door waiting for you, just the same way that Jesus is. And if you open up the door for Satan and you let him in, then he's going to come in and he's going to fill your life. But if you open up the door for Jesus, he's going to come in and fill your life. Don't leave the door open for sin. Leave the door open for Jesus and let the Spirit fill you. The works of the flesh that we see in Galatians 5:19 and following, and then the fruit of the Spirit that we see through verse 23, show us two contrasting lists of things that we can fill our life with. If you fill your life with the works of the flesh, then you have a problem. But if you fill your life with the fruit of the Spirit, like love, joy, peace, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, then you're focusing on the things that are right. Your focus should be on producing more of those traits, of those qualities, and filling your life with doing things like that, rather than allowing those works of the flesh to take hold of yourself and of your existence and of your being. Nobody needs more of the things that are the works of the flesh, but we can all use more love. Everybody can use more joy. Everybody can use more peace. All of these things are good, and bringing people to those things and bringing those things into your own life, into the house that is yourself, you're going to be better for it, and it's going to free you from the destruction and the ruin that sin brings to you. Sin destroys a person, Jesus helps people, and filling your life with the Spirit keeps that sin out of your life. We see from these passages the horrible impact that sin can have on you. These first century examples of people being afflicted with demons still ring true today in showing us exactly how bad sin is. And only by understanding that can we really understand how serious it is that we get rid of its influence in our lives. Sin is hated by God and will very tangibly ruin a person. And it's only by recognizing this, petitioning God for help, and filling yourself with His Spirit that you can make strides away from sin and its influence in your life and towards a more fruitful, better life.